Good afternoon and welcome to Cold Chain Insights, the podcast that focuses everything temperature-controlled logistics for the pharmaceutical industry. My name's Thomas Hunt, and this week I'm delighted to be joined by Wawi Kantz, who spent 15 years at Pfizer as Director of Digital AI and Data Analytics Unit, responsible for driving global AI adoption strategy across Pfizer's 80,000 person enterprise. And more recently, she set up her own consultancy business focusing on AI for business. Wawi, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
Hello, how are you? Thanks for having me.
Pleasure. It's good to have you on. I think a good place to start with this would be maybe if you give us a background to your career so far, and then maybe a bit about the work you're currently doing as well.
Absolutely. So I am an independent consultant focusing on AI transformation, and I just recently took that step after a long time at Pfizer, where I spent the last decade of my career. So really actively shaping Pfizer's AI journey. I, had roles where I developed AI models, where I worked with cross-functional teams, and then, over time, worked on our global AI policy, responsible AI evaluation framework, and most recently also was responsible to drive the company's AI adoption strategy for the entire enterprise. I do have a commercial background and then sort of evolved over time and most recently really worked across all domains. So from research to commercial, and obviously manufacturing, supply chain was a big part of that. So whilst I'm not a deep expert in the logistics field and in cold chain, obviously, I think I have a fair understanding of the challenges and nuances. And one thing I also realized during my work at Pfizer is how much impact the non-technical elements have on successful AI transformation. And especially looking at Europe, I saw that there's a huge gap in that, in terms of what I'm seeing in my day-to-day job, and then when I'm talking to businesses here in the region, right? So I really felt an urge and a call to action to change that and help other businesses with their AI transformations as well.
Yeah, I think it's one of the big areas that everyone struggles with at the moment, isn't it, in terms of moving across to AI, which is so spoken about across many industries, but how to do it effectively and seamlessly for many business units, not just in our sector, but a lot of others, I know is a huge challenge for a lot of people. So when you look at sort of temperature control logistics for medicines, where do you see AI making a real measurable difference today, or just generally in logistics as a whole?
Well, I think it's really, since logistics overall, and I think the same is true for cold chain, is such a data heavy area. I would say the biggest potential is probably in the old-fashioned, traditional, not so sexy predictive analytics, because you have a lot of structured data, right? And also these models are much easier to interpret in terms of transparency, understanding how different predictions are made. So I would see that's probably the biggest potential, as opposed to, the latest hype around generative AI, large language models, autonomous agents. I mean, all of that might eventually play a role, but really that predictive analytics space is where I feel the biggest wins and opportunities are.
Yeah. And can you just break down what that means in reality then? If you looked at predictive analytics, how would that play out for a sort of pharma logistics org?
Well, I mean, let's just take, temperature control, right? You have sensors that measure the temperature and so on. So you have a lot of data points along the journey. Of course, they need to be structured, and I appreciate that there's probably a lot of challenges around that. But still, you have data that come from machines and devices. So you have a lot of good structured data to work with already. So you could then not just, sort of monitor and see, temperature dropped here, so damn, we're screwed. But you could really use different data points in the journey to understand, okay, where might there be some risk, right? That there is temperature deviations or whatever, and then take actions upon that to sort of prevent harm from happening, if you will. That and that doesn't require any of the, GPT models or like these big large language models that sort of turned our world upside down in the last couple of years. It's really, these are established models where you can understand how a model came to a certain conclusion. And I think that's really where the biggest value is, in terms of predicting what will happen and being able to do something about it.
Yeah. And I think what's come out a lot from pharma leaders in our space is the amount of data they're getting and the noise and the amount of information they're getting off, for example, IoT or temperature controlled loggers, as you've just mentioned. It can be enormous, and it's sifting through that information quickly, making decisions, putting the right sort of parameters in space when they're getting the readings through to make sure they're making the right action at the right time. And are there models out there that would be very useful for that? I mean, and your experience when you're talking to customers, how au fait are they with this sort of technology, or is it something that they're very much beginning from in terms of understanding it?
I think it really ranges, but what I'm really seeing is that there is a genuine phenomenon where people just think of AI as this one thing, right? And oftentimes, because there is so much public awareness around ChatGPT and all those latest technologies, and the risk, right, of hallucinations, and you don't know what's happening, that AI per default is sort of a thing that we might not want to touch, and so on. So I think it's really about raising awareness that not all AI is the same, right? And there's different types of AI that are fit for purpose when it comes to different use cases.
Yeah, no, it's a really good point. You've led AI adoption at enterprise scale, which is quite unusual. And what's one lesson from that journey you wish every cold chain leader knew before starting?
I would say it's really that it's not just about the technology, and that implementing AI in a way that gives you value in return is not an easy thing, right? So I have that philosophy of seeing AI as an integration problem across basically 4 layers. And the first critical one is strategy. So why are you even using AI? What's the goal, the metric that you're chasing that you want to improve? And how does that serve your business? Because so often AI is just used because, it's fancy, it's cool, and, you just feel pressure. You have to have it. And then the second layer is operations. And of course, in the logistics space, that's a pretty big one. So not just making sure that, your AI is plugged into the workflows and it's really there in a meaningful way, but how do you think through the end-to-end process from how data is generated to how the AI is then being used to make decisions, and how does that flow back into your data, because you want your AI to learn. And then what I feel the most underrated areas, so I talked about strategy, operations, but then you also have people and culture. And this is where, often see, if you have this huge AI transformation project, you see training courses and, some maybe promotional videos that tell you how great things are. But this is something that I feel can really break your AI transformation and your strategy. If you don't bring your people along, if you don't listen to them, if you don't give them the understanding that they need to use whatever tool you give them in the most meaningful and responsible way, but then also having a culture where people are empowered to speak up if something's not working. Because if you don't have that culture, people will find their workarounds and they then, do their own stuff, do it as they did it always. And then in the end, you have double the work because you have the AI process and you have the old manual, like the shadow processes. And, that's not what you want.
Yeah. And if you were leading an AI adoption at enterprise scale, what would, in terms of bringing people along that journey, how would you teach someone's department to do that? What would be the process you'd want to follow in terms of steps, and how long would it typically take?
One thing I did when I established the Enterprise AI Champion Network at Pfizer was really training our champions on change management, right? And just avoiding, and I guess especially if you're working in an IT department and so on, you're really passionate about your tech solution, right? Don't go in, start selling tech solutions if people don't understand what the thing is, but even why the thing is needed, right? And how it supports your purpose, your business goals, or even their own job.
Hmm.
So really start the AI discussion, not talking about AI, but talking about the business challenges and so on, and then present how AI can be the solution.
It's quite interesting this. So how do you define the front end if you're looking at, I agree, the objectives of the business or the department they want to achieve? If they're not quite aware of what the AI can possibly do or what the options are in terms of technology, how do they decide what potential the end goal should be? How would you approach that?
It's a challenge, right? Because you
Mm,
need people who can make that connection. But what I saw at Pfizer, that there's hardly any team where you don't have one person who's an AI enthusiast
right. Yeah.
and who has that imagination, right? So it's really a matter of finding those innovative minds who have that ability, and then have them have the discussion with their teams about the problems they are seeing,
Hmm.
and sort of walk through the problems and say, hey, here's the data we have. What could we do with them if we gave, wanted to use the history of what we know to predict what's going to happen and so on. So I think it's a mixture of AI education and getting the basics across, but
Hmm.
always with sort of the business problems in mind. Because what I just figured out, if you do generic AI trainings and you explain what machine learning is and all of the theoretical stuff, if you can't connect that to someone's work or life reality, it's not going to stick.
Yeah. And are there typical blocks that AI, in your experience, really solves? For example, removing the basic administration element of a person's role or getting much better analytical data. Are there certain things that if you walk into an organization that will have the biggest impact with that team and will effectively get the most response, won't it? The most interest.
I mean, this is now more a generative AI and large language model use case, but one thing that you can find in almost any team is, you have a bunch of knowledge, whether it's SOPs or other documentation that people usually work with. And it's very simple to just build a chatbot with, simple retrieval, where you say, instead of, scrolling through PDFs or, large documents, to just find what you have to do, or, find the information in a quick way. That's something that's really easy to implement. You can almost build it, with people as you're talking to them, and show how it works. And that is sort of a quick win use case that gets people on board and provides quick value as well.
Right. And in your program, you ask people to separate sort of value from the wow moment of AI. And you said the fact that it can, you can get distracted with it. Where should they not use AI at the moment, in your experience?
Well, I would say don't use AI where you don't understand it, right?
Right.
So, if it's predictive analytics, don't do it if you don't know where your data comes from, right? You have no context, you have no quality checks, because whatever the AI is going to predict is going to be useless because it's making the predictions from something you can trust. Else, in terms of the more like large language models, play around, learn, understand how they, but really make sure you don't give permissions, or, kind of don't base decisions solely on the output if you can't bulletproof it, right? And
Mm.
again, I think that's sort of the skill that is really missing and more critical than any prompt engineering or, basic compliance checks. Really understanding how these models work, how they learn from data, how they work with probabilities,
Mm-hmm.
rather than definite answers. If you have that understanding, it makes the use of AI so much more intuitive
Mm-hmm.
and also meaningful, and you can do it in a responsible way because you understand how the outputs come about.
Yeah. And if you had a team of a large team, how much autonomy would you give them to go and dive into their language model to build out, for example, agents or something else to help them with tasks, versus actually having a more structured process to allow people to do that correctly? Because for me, that sounds quite complex for someone who's not quite technical in terms of, as you say, it's a whole new skill in terms of building out the AI
Yeah.
models that you have.
I mean, of course, it depends on your entire company's infrastructure and all that. But I think the first thing you need to do is give them safe access to that technology, because the biggest risk I fear is that people who just say, we're not doing AI, people are doing it. And then they are feeding their data into public tools. And, the risks that you're exposing to your IP, your customer data and whatever, this is just too big. So make sure you get those contracts, whether it's a Copilot license or ChatGPT, whatever, right? Or Anthropic, have your safe enterprise solution where you can make sure that no data leaves, your environment, that people can experiment. And then also make sure you have these minimum guidances and guardrails, right? Tell them what data sets, what areas they can explore, and then just also be crystal clear about the no-goes, right? And say, okay, these are data you're not going to touch and you're not going to put into a model because that's just too high risk. But just being clear about those high-level rules up front, and then just make sure that those who experiment share back, right? So you can learn from it and you build that community around it.
Yeah, and if I'm leading a pharma organization and a large global sort of brand, how do I measure the payback on AI? What apart from just obviously time saved, what should I be looking at to say, okay, this is value for money?
Yeah. I mean, this is, I think one of the biggest challenges that any business is seeing right now. How do you measure value of AI? And I feel we just probably also need to take a step back and accept that we'll never be able to fully measure the value of AI itself. So first of all, how can we measure the value of whatever AI human collaboration we have and new processes that we're setting up? So, and really figuring out having that higher level goal, right? And saying, this is what we're facing now, and this is where we want to get to, and then measure whether you'd be like the whole transformation initiative has been successful, because you can never fully say, this is the people side of the value, this is the technology side of the value. So really, having a bit more of a holistic view.
Yeah, no, and I think time saved for, I think a lot of people just fall to that. But I think maybe in our industry, it's potentially a little bit easier, because you could produce, for example, on temperature excursions using predictive analytics or AI or information on lane routes, and been able to really dive into the data in a much deeper way now.
Totally.
You could probably measure that quite nicely in terms of the reduced failure rates or better lanes you're running. So potentially but it is quite difficult, I think, to always look at the value of, and as you say, try and get that across to your team in terms of, you've got to learn this new skill and in this new area, a new way of working, and this is the reason why. Isn't always that obvious.
Yeah, but I think that's really one of the key success factors that is so often overlooked. Like for any AI tool or process that you're introducing, be clear about what's your end goal, right? Because if you think about like the cold chain process, right? Is it like getting, like, you want to avoid the deviations, or do you want to get the product there faster, right? And you need to be clear about that, because that has some trade-offs, and that really influences how you design your solution and your process. But then also, if it comes to the employee level, and even if it's more like in an office-based role, if you say you want to save time and save hours, well, what do you want to do with those hours, right? Do you want to have a better work-life balance, which is a fair thing, but then, be clear about it? Or do you want to work on an additional project? Do you want to explore something that you haven't been able to explore before? So really think through what's going to happen with that productivity gain.
Yeah. And I think with our business, we were looking at removing sort of admin tasks or inputs as much as possible, and getting people onto higher value work. And I think you can sit down with staff sometimes and say, what are you doing in your day-to-day work that is manual inputs, or what are you spending a lot of time on in the day, for example, going through data and information, where actually we could remove a certain amount of that and you could actually work on the really important project that we've got coming up, is often a good way of looking at it.
Yeah.
What are the top 3 reasons AI transformation stalls or fails in your experience?
First big reason, I think, is unrealistic expectations. Expecting AI to be that magic bullet that solves all of your problems without you having to do anything, that's not going to happen. And And then I think the other reasons are exactly what I mentioned before around ignoring one or more of these four areas, right? Making sure you have your strategic fit, the data governance in place, right? Making sure it fits into the processes, and then the whole people culture side of things. If you underestimate that, it's very
Yeah.
unlikely you're going to see lasting transformation.
Yeah. And I think I've read that you often stress integration across strategy and operations, people and culture, which kind of feeds into what you've just said.
Mhm.
Where do you see the biggest blind spots, and how can logistics leaders test for that blind spot fast? How do you know within your team where you might have the biggest stumbling block when doing a rollout?
The biggest, most simple thing you can do is talk to the people on the ground, because what you see so often in any transformation project is you have the project team, and then of course they do some user research and so on, and they bring in some people to co-create, which are usually your rock stars on the team, right? And then you have steering committees, and then you look at your system metrics and adoption metrics, and they all kind of look good. But then you go to the people on the ground, maybe even the people who might have touched it once and then never come back. Talk to them and ask them for their honest opinion, and that will tell you so much.
Yeah, right. And what kind of questions would you ask to those individuals?
Well, I would just ask them, like, if they haven't used it, like, why aren't you, and
Mm-mm.
what's holding you back? But really, and that's the culture piece that comes in, right? Like, tell me in my face, right? It's not gonna fall back on you, but we really want to know and we want to do something about it. And those who use it, ask them what has changed, because oftentimes people use it, but still you don't get the value out of it because they still quality check, right? Or adjust the results and so on. And you don't see that in adoption metrics, right? People might be using your system, but that might not automatically mean that you're getting value out of it.
And how specific do you go in terms of a team? Do you work with each individual on their own AI sort of strategy individually that suits them, or is it more of a team playbook that you're trying to roll out? How niche do you go when you're trying to build something out with a whole org?
I mean, if you're building something out for the whole org, you can never be anywhere. So it's really about bundling your people who are the drivers in each domain, because also, I mean, I'm not a research expert, I'm not a logistics expert,
Mm-mm.
you name it. So you need people who have the domain knowledge and who have the understanding of AI. And what I found extremely powerful is giving those people access to what's happening at an enterprise level, because usually those people on the ground hardly have exposure to what's happening at an enterprise AI strategy level. What, technology is gonna come, what's being discussed on a governance side of things. So really making them aware and kind of connecting the hierarchy levels, and
Mm-hmm.
making sure information flows. That's proven to be really powerful. So it's really about enabling those champions and those drivers in the different domains and in the teams, and then letting them work and innovate within secure environments, and also the different high level rules and so on. But then even when it comes to governance, right, some more granular decisions and governance processes just have to be domain specific, because you can't have the same governance for AI in the research area and logistics, and then like you have in marketing, for example.
Yeah. Okay. And your AI experience day highlights models, probabilities, and not yes and no answers. What do you mean by that, and how do you keep teams engaged as you go through that process?
I think that's really, if there's one thing you need to teach people about AI, is that it works with probabilities, right? And that alone completely flips how you approach it. So think about weather forecasts. Everybody's used to know, like, there's an 80% probability of rain, right? And then it's up to you to decide, do I need to bring my umbrella, or do I just take the risk, because in the end it doesn't matter, I get wet though. I can live with it. And kind of the same is true for AI models. So what I do in my trainings is I start with the old boring traditional models, and then depending on the team, we pick a use case that resonates with them, right?
Mm-hmm.
So let's say we would build a model that predicts temperature deviations.
How would you build that model just out of interest? Can you just talk us through how you might do that?
You would think through, okay, what are some data and variables that can tell us whether the temperature will drop or increase or whatever.
Hmm.
And then you would see what data you have in your data set. And so those warning signs you can then sort of use from historical data and say, hey, look at all of these temperature deviation cases where temperature increased, whatever, and then find the pattern, what happened before. And then the model learns and understands, okay, these are the patterns that usually happen before the temperature increases or you have a deviation. And then you can apply that logic to your new data, right? And the model is able to apply that learning. But then the model doesn't tell you, the temperature is going to increase now, yes or no. It tells you, oh, based on that data that I've just seen, I feel that there's 90% risk that you will see an increase in temperature within the next, whatever, 5 hours. Or however
Yeah,
you
yeah, yeah.
question. And then it's up to us humans to decide, okay, 90%, is that something where I just need to act right now? And what is my strategy? What am I going to do now?
Hmm.
As opposed to, is it something where I say, unless I'm 95% certain, I'm not going to do anything? Or what if it's just 55%, right? So you always have to see this probability cutoff with the lens of your use case, because I assume, like if you act on a prediction, that might have an impact on your delivery, right? So if you have the truck stop just because that model says I'm 55% certain that whatever is going to break in the next 10 minutes, that might get you into trouble in the long term. So it's really about having teams discuss, okay, so what do we think is a good cutoff, and how do we deal with the different consequences?
Yeah, and when you say model, are you talking about a large language model and building that within there? And is that an agent you're building?
So that would be a basic predictive model, right? So what
Yeah.
I've just explained to you is, there's like they call like random forest or XGBoost or time series predictions. Like really depends on what you want to predict and how you do it. But that's sort of AI that's been around for decades, right?
Hmm.
And where you can then really dig into each individual prediction and see, okay, actually the model suggested that there's a 80% risk of whatever happening because these and these and these variables showed up.
Yeah.
So you can really have that transparency to understand whether you trust that prediction or not. Where large language models become very powerful, I think, is when they're plugged onto these more basic predictive
Right.
models, because they can then help you think through it, right? And connect it maybe with your standard operating procedures and saying, if you have that warning, these are your options, these are the pros and cons of each option, and sort of walk the end user through what the data means.
Yeah. So you're using one model to produce the information and data, and then your large language model to analyze it and give you potential outcomes.
Or
Yeah.
like talking to, the more coded model that, usually you would need to build some sort of interface, right, to engage with that data. And usually the outputs of these predictive models, are very statistical heavy, and you have a lot of
Right.
numbers and so on. And if you're somebody who's, somewhere along the lane and just has to do something now, if I'm a truck driver, right, I don't want to deal with all that stuff. I just want to get a warning, and I want to have some options or instructions in terms of what I want to do.
Yeah. A lot of AI seems to be cross-using across different platforms like this, isn't it? A lot of AI I've seen in companies is people using a platform for a certain amount of information or data or whatever they're using it for, and then transitioning that across to something else like a large language model for the final piece. Is that your experience, or is that the wrong way of doing it?
Well, I think it's just the way that our world works and how data flows.
Right.
I think it's the big challenge is that fragmentation, and especially in the logistics world, right, where you have so many players from often different countries and so on. So how can you even make sure that you bring all of the data together in a way that, is sort of one language? Because It's often things really break with simple problems, like, one system tracks units in thousands and the other
Mhm.
system tracks units in millions. And if nobody kind of translates between those two data generating systems and make sure that, there's this layer where it's all cleaned up and consolidated, then it's going to be a challenge.
Yeah. Okay, that's good. Your colleagues credited you for the Pfizer AI Festival, which I understand is a one-day event. And I was, first of all, quite interested to understand what that event was and what it covered and what your sort of key learnings and takeaways were. And then also, when you've got something like that, how do you make the key information stick when teams are busy and they're coming in for a session like that? What's your sort of strategy to get a good result?
Yeah, I mean, that one, they actually, after I left it, the second AI festival, which was way bigger than our initial one, but it was really, we wanted to do something that raises awareness,
Mm-hmm.
for the many capabilities that we had at Pfizer globally with the entire workforce. And we had different agenda streams, from the basics to really zooming in on the use cases that are already happening, and then on the more societal learning and so on impact of AI. And I just felt, first of all, I was so surprised in terms of how much interest there was in the basic stream, like
Mm-hmm.
really understanding what AI was. And I think that was also really reassuring that so many colleagues realized, okay, this is something that's important, right? And that I want to
Mm.
understand more. But then the most powerful sessions were those where, the teams really just presented how they were using AI already in their work, because in the end, that's what matters to you, right?
Yeah, it's interesting. So you're saying that the best learnings obviously are from people internally because there's very direct crossover, and sharing best practice is often what you've seen one of the best ways of getting good results.
Yeah. And it's something like that experience really also sort of changed how I approach AI learning. So whilst of course, you can't do everything bespoke, and, all of these high level general courses have their value, but I find it just so much more powerful when you combine the learning with the use case development, because it makes the questions and the challenges and the risks just so much more powerful when
Yeah,
you shape a use case. And then, just like we discussed, like, what does it mean if we set our cutoff at 80%? How does that influence our process, and so on and so on? And this is how people then really understand how these systems work.
yeah. No, yeah, I think you're right. And that festival day that you did, is that something you recommend for most sort of large organizations, say in logistics or pharma, to educate their teams on AI? Because it sounds like a very good way to bring everyone together on one message. It's a company strategy and a key pillar going forward versus small teams doing breakout work, etc. So your experience is very positive of that, and is it something that you would teach or in your sort of consultancy work of sort of a way to drive change?
Yeah, I would say just doing a festival for a festival's sake, right, isn't gonna, change anything. So it's really thinking through, what would you want to achieve. If what you want to achieve is bringing your people along in terms of why are we using AI in our company, right? So really
Hmm.
giving them that strategic picture and helping them understand what that means for their roles, for their units, and so on. If you use a festival to do that, I think it's a great vehicle, right? Where you
Hmm.
have
Hmm.
leaders articulate their vision, but then you immediately translate it into, oh, and that's what it actually looks like. And then have people on the ground talk about how they are using it and how it changed the way they work.
Yeah, and it's when you were at Pfizer, how much was the senior leadership team driving this sort of top down? For example, was the CEO involved in the messaging around AI and aligning with you in terms of pushing that message, or is it very much sort of start with you and then drop down from there?
Well, I mean, at Pfizer, AI was a senior leadership priority, right? And
Right.
I
Okay.
think that also really helped to rally everyone around one goal.
Hmm.
So it wasn't something that we had to sell as, you know, certain expectations that this is going to work. And this is going to happen. So it was more about how do we make sure that we bring that leadership vision and the strategy that has been built, by our leaders at a high level. How do we make sure that this gets down to everyone in the organization and people really understand it and support it and buy into it?
Yeah. Okay, that's good. And if you look to the future now, in terms, if we sit down in 2 or 3 years' time, what do you think will have changed with AI in that period, and where do you think potentially we're headed in terms of how it can help us?
If you just look at what happened with my fellow Austrian and OpenClaw and these latest evolutions where you really have autonomous bots who can do tasks for you and you chat into your phone and they are coding at home. That's where the future is heading. Is it super risky the way it's currently? Of course it is. But I think that's the direction we're heading. And I think what we, in terms of businesses on the ground, have to do is we need to not think about all of these things because they're not ready for enterprise scale anyway, but really make sure you work on the foundations. Make sure you get your data ready. Make sure your people understand the basics of AI, because there will be a time where people will work with autonomous agents who have some level of autonomy. And how do you oversee their work? How do you lead an AI team? So previously when you became a people manager, you had years of experience, right, to learn, and then you have your team and then you lead them. You're not doing everything yourself, right? You're handing off tasks, you're trusting people, you're giving them certain levels of responsibility and accountability. And these are exactly the skills you will need if you manage a team of AI agents. And really making sure that we get all of our workforce to a level where they have the ability to figure out, okay, this is something where the risk is minimal and I just can give it to an autonomous agent and, just have some technical guardrails that will warn me, that's fine. And this is where no way you're not going to get access to my data. This is where I'm sort of the ultimate, person to take the decision. These are the skills that we need to learn.
Yeah. Oh, it seems like we're so far off being able to have teams manage agents technically proficiently and safely. It seems like that's a big step for us to take as a workforce in the next couple of years, just in terms of the education that's needed. Even people who are quite au fait and good with technology and AI, totally. I think building autonomous agents is just a different level, isn't it, in terms of skills?
It is. And also, if you think, I think that the key investment is really get your data clean and to a level where you couple your data with context, right? Because if you have to think of these agents, if you have a highly skilled expert and you give them a bunch of data, and then that expert has no idea where that data has been collected, right? In what context and so on. How would that expert, even human expert, be able to make a good decision out of it? So really think through also what information, what contextual knowledge would a human expert need to make sense of these, hordes of data, and then make sure you capture that somewhere. Because if you don't have that, the best AI is not gonna help you.
Yeah. Okay. And so in your opinion, do you think training teams over the next couple of years is one of the key things that businesses should be looking at?
Yes. And really taking small steps, right? Letting them experiment in safe environments. Maybe look at small pieces, right? Take one step at a time. Where is data not captured? Where is it not digitized even? And really helping teams on the ground understand that the way they might capture some events or incidents or whatever ultimately matters in terms of how much an AI can be implemented or not, right? So it's really that awareness of, hey, my activity when I'm pushing that button or when I'm just signing off that sheet or whatever has an impact on our ability to use AI. And this is why is sort of something that we need to do now, because otherwise we'll never harness, whatever.
Yeah. It's just amazing, the reliance on human beings to almost go to the next stage, which you're saying is a slightly autonomous sort of agent who can run certain things internally in the business. And I have read around us needing to be more educated on how to handle that sort of workforce, which is kind of, as you quite rightly say, it's a different type of employee, isn't it, within the business? But the challenge of having to implement that so quickly, because everything's moving so rapidly, is so hard. So I can see it as a big challenge we're all going to have to wrestle with in the next couple of years.
Totally.
Yeah. Okay. And just from, if I'm talking to my own team, what's one habit that makes AI safer on an everyday basis? We use large language models here. What should we be worried about in terms of those models?
I would say the one thing that makes it really safer is use it and get experience with it, and question the results. So don't take everything at face value, because also these large language models, they predict the next probable word, right? So again, it's just a prediction of what the truth might be and not the truth. So really ask it to give you the source references, control the references, cross-check them. And then at some point you get a feeling where these models hallucinate and make things up, and where you can trust them, right? And really, once you have that basic experience, I really encourage you to play around with some system settings and give your AI some contextual knowledge, so you don't need to re-explain your business context all of the time. And because in the end, your business context really also defines the quality of outputs that you get, right? If you don't tell your AI that certain things are important for your business, how will it know it? You will just get back generic stuff or stuff that's just made up.
Yeah. No, it's a good point. I only learned a year or so ago, the sort of, as you mentioned earlier in the piece there, around actually having accounts with your large language model makes it more secure, rather than making the information open you're putting in there, etc.
Oh yeah, and the one thing, and this is sort of now outside the business, because I'm assuming that businesses will provide their safe environments. If you use any open free version or paid version of ChatGPT or Claude or what have you, there's usually in the settings a thing that says help improve model for everyone or something along those lines. Switch that off, because that means that all of anything you put into that tool will go back to OpenAI or Anthropic, and they will be able to train their next model on it, and it will be part of the knowledge that model has. So I'm in my within my friends, I'm the one who's just like, can I look into your settings, your ChatGPT?
Yeah, 100%. It's just like it's a never-ending problem, isn't it? The whole thing. I can see it. Wow.
You don't want to have your medical history or whatever you're discussing, right? Your problems with your girlfriend,
your business, private things or the business things or all these things. It's it's amazing. Yeah. Okay, it's great.
So that's probably the one thing that really you can do very quickly.
Yeah, great. Okay, good. Well, look, I know we're out of time, but my last question was, I know you do consultancy work in this space. So can you just tell us what kind of work you tend to cover on this, and how you really work with companies, and then how people get in contact with you if they do want to engage and sort of have initial calls?
Totally. So whilst I'm officially a consultant, I see myself more as a sparring partner, because I'm a big fan of co-creation, where the client really has the domain knowledge, the work experience, and so on. And I can bring that experience of how you can implement AI into an organization in a meaningful and responsible way, and then take that journey together. My approach is really starting with the strategy. And I almost have that mantra that I'm not talking to clients if they can't tell me where they're heading as a company, right? And what their strategic goal is. I mean, I am talking to them, but I'm not talking to them about their AI strategy, because if you don't know what your strategic goals are, then, don't touch AI, because it's gonna just, be a wasted investment. So yeah, I'm just, then depending on where the company is and so on, just co-creating what that transformation will look like across all of these 4 layers.
Yeah, nice. And if people want to get in contact with you, is that LinkedIn the best way?
LinkedIn, my website, wawikantz.com, or hello@wawikantz.com.
Yeah. Oh, nice. Great. Yeah. Great. All right. Well, look, thank you so much for coming on to the podcast today. It was a really good session, and it's great to have a true expert on around this topic, because I think probably 60% of the people we talk to, AI comes up and they're all talking around it. So it's invaluable to have some of your expertise on. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Well, thank you. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Good. So you've been listening to Cold Chain Insights. My name's Thomas Hunt. Please tune in next week for our next guest. Thank you.